Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Make Mental podcast. Caleb Unsky here, as always, and today we are joined by yet another very special and exciting guest, Emily Perrin. Thank you for joining the Make Mental podcast.
Sure. Super honored and excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm really excited about this one, as I am about most of the episodes, or all of the episodes, to be honest. But Emily is a licensed master of social work. She is certified in mindfulness meditation. I want to get into that a little bit. A certified breath coach, which is something I've been practicing. Not the certified part, but just the breathing part. She enjoys yoga, is the teacher of that. I mean, a BA in psychology from the University of Virginia and a former college athlete. She also attended the University of Denver, Drexel. I mean, her list is quite extensive, and she has close to 15 years of experience coaching at the youth sport level. Is there anything I missed on that list, Emily, that you think is important for our listeners to know, or that you're just proud of in general? Maybe it's not an accomplishment of yours, or maybe it's just something you're proud of that I missed, because there is so much to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I did coach collegiately. So I coached at the University of Pennsylvania women's soccer for 3 years. I was an assistant coach. So, and that's, excuse me, shapes a lot of the work that I do now because I work in the collegiate space. So I think that's the only other thing I would throw in there. But no, thank you so much. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, of course. And you just got me really excited because I am currently an assistant coach for a women's soccer program at my alma mater of Oswego for one last season. So it's good to have a fellow assistant coach
Yeah.
on the podcast. I think it's a unique role in itself, trying to balance the needs of your players, but also trying to match the energy that the head coach wants to run the program
Totally.
as. Definitely a tricky situation at times, but I kind of like the challenge. So.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. There's a lot there. It's, the dynamic of a staff, regardless of what level you're at, but particularly at the college and professional level. I mean, it's everything, right? Because in sport, so much of it works from the top down. So it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes gets overlooked is that, especially at the higher divisions, it's a livelihood for a lot of people, and the coaches have to run it to quite literally put food on the table for their family.
Yeah.
But they also have a conscience most of the time for the athletes that they coach. So they also want to treat you like a human and not just a cog in a wheel. And I think that is also tricky for a coaching staff, but also a player to understand.
Mm-hmm.
We could be getting all the minutes in the world and losing and think we have the solution and know everything as the player, but we also have to realize that the coach is human as well. And like I said, most of the time when their best interest is you and their family, the program does well. But for you, what was the trickiest part of being an assistant coach for you? I know you said it shaped a lot of what you do today. Was it an occurrence that happened that shaped a lot of your work, or is it just a passion you're now fueling?
I'm sure it's a little bit of both. I mean, I'm also the daughter of a coach. So, for the first, almost 10 years of my life, my dad was an assistant coach. I mean, he coached college basketball at UVA. So, I mean, I grew up I am a coach's daughter through and through. My dad also has a PhD in sports psychology. So, that was really my world. That's what I came into the world, right? I knew when I graduated from UVA and was done playing that I wanted to coach. I had already started, and to be fair, I started coaching camps in the summer at 14 years old, but started coaching at the youth level, became a head coach, took over some teams. Really right away while I was still in college, and the opportunity to become an assistant coach at the University of Pennsylvania came up, and I took it, not really knowing if that's the route that I wanted to go or stick with, but I felt it was a great opportunity, a really good learning environment, and I slowly found that college coaching was not what I wanted to do for a variety of reasons, But I think one of my passions and some of my work now is really working with coaches at a variety of levels. I think we have come a really long ways in this mental health movement for athletes, and there is a lot that is occurring for the student athlete, which is so, so important. And we have to really remember that it's not just about the student athlete. And when we actually support our coaches and their mental health, that trickles down. That's a really big impact. So that's something I love. I think it's so, so important. So yeah, I have different programming and workshops and all that stuff for coaching staffs. It's something that as an assistant coach at the collegiate level and a very young coach, I really struggled with. Um, as you mentioned earlier, it's a lifestyle. It is a business, right? I mean, we are quite literally, that's how we're making our living and putting food on the table and all the above. And yeah, there were just pieces in my collegiate coaching career that I really struggled with. I mean, my mental health in particular, but yeah, it's just something, an area that I move in now that I'm really passionate about, and I think it's really needed.
Yeah, what was it about coaching or assistant coaching that really poked at your mental health?
Go Global is a free flowing technology company that handcrafts, embellishes, and manufactures garments and accessories. Designed on the principles of people, places, and possibilities, Go Global reimagines fashion and is inspired by you, the people of the world.
It's a good question. I'm not sure it's particularly anything about coaching at that collegiate level. I think it's a mix of everything. One of the things that I really struggled with was that recruiting aspect. Some people absolutely love to get into the college game and do recruiting, and I just didn't. There was something that felt, and gosh, I mean, this was 10 years ago when I was at Penn, and recruiting since then has changed drastically. I mean, the college sport has changed drastically, right? But yeah, I didn't love recruiting. I really didn't. I did not love that aspect. What I loved about coaching was connection and really sitting with and being with my players, sure on the field, but really off the field. And that's really kind of what was the kind of turning point of, wow, I don't actually want to be coaching soccer for the rest of my life. I want to be working with athletes in some capacity. I just don't know how. So that's really when I left Penn and pivoted and then went back to school, and here I am now, right? But I mean, I'm very open and honest about my own mental health journey, which started way before I ever became a college coach. I mean, like most people's, starts in childhood. And yeah, through my college coaching years, I was struggling immensely with, chronic and debilitating anxiety, panic attacks, coping in ways that were really maladaptive. And I'm such an advocate of helping people understand that, coping skills are not either they're survival mechanisms, right? We can't always look at them. And I think we're very quick to look at how people cope in maladaptive ways as bad. And it's not bad. It actually makes a lot of sense the way people are coping, whether that's substance use, whether that's binge eating in my case, whether that's self-harm. So we really need to kind of take a step back at times and say, wow, actually the way that people are coping often when they're navigating some really difficult things makes a ton of sense, even if it's maladaptive. And so really when I left college coaching, and I always kind of joke, really just fell apart because there was so much of my identity that was wrapped up in sport, was when I was really forced to turn to my healing journey and really address a lot of that. So yeah, I'm sure I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I'm not sure, to come back to your question, I'm not sure it was necessarily college coaching or coaching at the collegiate level that was the issue. I think it was a combination of a lot of things.
Yeah, it seems like coaching might have just been the place where they came to the forefront of of your mind or of your story. I mean, like you said, it was probably always there. It's just maybe the noise of being a student athlete kind of slowed down and allowed you to spend time focusing on parts of yourself that you necessarily didn't get to tap into yet. Do you think that's true at all, or do you think it's just like you kind of mentioned, you were just
Yeah.
coaching and it happened?
I mean, I think, one thing I'll mention is, because I think part of this is sharing our own mental health journey, right? And mine is, I mean, um, it's pretty repetitive. My journey with mental health started at a very young age with some pretty significant childhood trauma, and that manifested in a lot of different ways. And I was born in 1990, and so throughout my childhood, we weren't really having conversations about mental health, and we were not really sending our kids to therapy, and therapy was not normalized really. And so what we now know were panic attacks and pretty heightened levels of anxiety was just kind of like, I don't know. They just weren't really addressed. And that's not to say that my family wasn't on top of my well-being. That's not to say that my family wasn't loving and supportive. I think this is really real, right? I mean, we know that so much of mental health, it's we allow people to see what we want them to see. So yeah, I mean, throughout high school, I mean, I've been in inpatient psychiatric care 2 times, one when I was a junior in high school and then one as an adult. I mean, no, I think all along the way, right, I had been struggling and navigating a lot of these challenges, but I think in particular, then you get into a work environment in particular, right? College coaching, that is very intense. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of demand. There's nothing really, and we can't really say what's normal and what's not normal, but there's not a lot that's, I would say, healthy in many places for college coaching, right? We really do not support the well-being of our coaches, specifically at the collegiate level. And so, yeah, maybe it's just kind of one of those where, my journey in particular, it just kind of came to its head when I was college coaching, but it was definitely always there all along the way.
Yeah, I agree in the sense of there's a lack of support sometimes for coaching staff at the collegiate level specifically. I can't can't help but think of back to a trip that we took where it's like a 6 hour drive because we don't really get to fly often or at all for our Division 3 college. But we drive across the entirety of New York State with the school that I'm at. So it's a 6 hour drive if you're going from pretty much
Sure.
Canada to Rochester, and it's more than that. It's like Canada to pretty much way up north to Syracuse. So it's probably like a 9 hour drive for some schools in our conference to play each other.
Hmm.
And we get up. Well, before we get up, we don't go to bed until like 2 in the morning because we're stressed out about the game tomorrow, just like the athletes are. Except they probably sleep a little easier knowing that they have some control over what happens on the field, and we just kind of stand on the sideline and point and pray. So we go to bed really late, then we get up early, make sure the athletes have all the food and the resources necessary for the away trip, make sure everyone's there on time, all the jerseys, the game plan, there's no injuries. Like, that's a lot in itself. Then we drive to the game, we have the game. Depending on the outcome, the drive home is tiring or just horrible. There's really no two other outcomes for me after that. If we win it, I'm excited, but it's still exhausting. I would get more tired as a coach than I would as a player, honestly, and I didn't understand what that was about for the first 3 games. Um, but yeah, to get to your point, like, it's another 6 hour ride home. And then by the time we drive from campus to our house, because most of the coaches don't live, like, I mean, within 10-15 minutes, but I ended up driving 45 minutes to my college. I don't get home till 2 in the morning. So, like, that's exhausting in itself, right? Is there a way you think that we can teach coaches, and maybe this is in your curriculum, and I don't want to just throw it out there for the world, but that we can teach coaches to really value their sleep? Because I think that's something we just neglect, right? We
Mm.
want to, and then I forget to mention a lot of coaches have families, like we
Yeah.
said in the beginning. So then they have to go home and play mom or play
Right.
dad or
Totally.
play something else, right? How do we get them to start valuing their sleep so that they can show up for themselves and all those people I just mentioned in their
Hmm.
life?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, it's such a great, yeah, it's such a great question. And I think One of the things I really try to do in my work is spend a lot of time. I guess we could call it psychoeducation, but really it's just, I think, basic education and building awareness around all of this stuff. So, for example, and I do it with my athletes, but I also think it's important for coaches as well. Sleep is such a, I really don't think people understand how important sleep is, particularly for an athlete, and the impact that not sleeping has on your nervous system, therefore your ability to then perform, not just, well, but at like a base level, right? And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time trying to really break that down and help people really understand and connect the dots, because I think one of the things we have to always remember is that sport is within greater society. And unfortunately, we live in a world that doesn't prioritize sleep. We actually prioritize the opposite. I mean, people wear getting X amount of hours of sleep like a badge of honor, right? Oh, well,
Mm.
I stayed up working until this, or oh my God, I had to get up at this hour to, right? We prioritize not sleeping. We prioritize the grind. We prioritize, this productivity, which for some reason, somehow in that messaging, it was linked that, oh, well, to be more productive means I get less sleep, or sleep, it gets put on the back burner. And it's actually the opposite, right? In order to be more productive and efficient, you actually need more sleep. I mean, I would say most college athletes need, 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and there is no chance that they're getting that. Now we're getting into the college coaching piece, right? Which is, yeah, we have to remember that overarching cultural and societal piece impacts them as well. So I always like to really break that down, because I think it's important for us to, that then gives us the awareness to choose differently. That then gives us the agency, right, to do something radical, which is to rest more, to prioritize getting in bed at X amount of hours, turning your phone on. I'm one of those people that, like, my phone goes on silent at 8 o'clock. Do not bother me past 8 o'clock, because you're infringing on my boundaries around sleep. I'm someone that's had chronic insomnia for my entire life. So it's taken me almost 33 years to get to this place, right? But, like, I'm not going to check my email past 8 o'clock. It's not happening. There is nothing, unless, somebody is, and even I'll put it this way, right? For a mental health therapist, I'm not crisis support. So even if someone was in crisis, I'm not the person that you need to be reaching out to, right? So I think this is really about providing that awareness, providing the lens and the perspective to then empower coaches and athletes to realign with what's important to them. Because if what is important to them is actually being the healthiest person, human, that they can be, being the most effective teammate that they can be, performing at a really high level and maintaining that, then wow, they're going to find out really quickly that sleep aligns with that, right? So now they get to then make choices, create habits, create routines around that stuff. And so I think this starts with, particularly on the coaches, exactly what we're talking about, right? This awareness, this helping them connect the dots, and then really getting into the weeds. And to your question about my programming, yes. One of the things that I spend a lot of time in this program around is, how are you as a coach taking care of you? Because if you're not taking care of you, you are not going to be able to, on a consistent basis, show up and be a role model and be a leader and be someone that can empower and help athletes be more resilient. So what we really need to be doing is helping our coaches build their own resiliency. And a lot of that is, some of this stuff is as basic, right, as prioritize sleep and create self-care routines, right? But it's not that basic, because it's really challenging. As you mentioned, so many coaches, they have families and they've got little ones, and they're going home and they've got a baby that's getting put into their arms, right? There's a lot of complexity here, right? So I spend a lot of time really helping people think about this and think about, how do I make some of these concepts, self-care, resiliency, using mindfulness, sleep hygiene, accessible for me? because we have to meet people where they're at, right? It is unrealistic, in my opinion, to tell a head coach of a Division 1, 2, 3 program that has 3 kids that is getting back at 2 a.m. to then go, okay, well, sleep in until 10. They've got to get their kids up, right? That's not realistic. So we can't go for unrealistic. We have to go for meeting people where they are. And I think there are a lot of ways to do that. It's just actually carving out the time to sit down and go through this stuff and to put energy into resources that can help them. Yeah, that's kind of where I would go with that. Does that help answer your question?
And then some. So thank you very much for that.
Sure.
I appreciate it. There's a couple things I noticed in when you were speaking though, and I wanted to touch on one of them.
Sure.
You said meet them where they're at. I heard from a gentleman, Duncan Kirkwood. He was also a guest on the episode. In one of his social media posts, he said when you're typing in a destination into your GPS, say anywhere you want to go, when it says choose a starting point, you don't type in an hour down the road.
Yeah.
You type in exactly where you are on the map, right? And yeah, you might look at it and go like, dang it, I wish I was an hour down the road. But how do you get to an hour down the road? You start right where you are.
Yeah.
I think that's a good visual for some people that might be struggling to conceptualize
Love it.
the meeting people where they're at and understanding it. You said to understand where you're at, it starts with awareness. How do we as players, as coaches, as people even, because this transcends sport, just slow down for a minute, just exist and understand like, hey, I'm stressed today. Why? Okay, it's that crucial question of, okay, one, I understand I'm stressed. That's awesome. Like, not the stress part, but the awareness. Once you get that down, because that might be difficult in itself, once you get that down, it's why am I stressed? Is it for me, as I'm very open about, I didn't drink enough water today, which I'm realizing I just didn't. So thank you for bringing that up. Is I sip on my 4th coffee of the day, but it's a Friday. We accountants, we get through the busy season. Although I'm not an accountant, I work for accountants, but still.
Yeah.
Side tangent. 1, you get the awareness. 2, you ask yourself, okay,
yeah, I think you're 100% right. I always talk with my athletes like awareness isn't enough, right? Awareness doesn't move the needle, so to speak. It's the starting place, but I think for me, that next phase, actually, a lot of the work that I spend with my athletes and even coaches at times is then removing the judgment, because what I often find is that, and I am this to a T, we spend a lot of times, and sometimes this is the hump of being able to get to actual movement and action, because we judge ourselves. And so much of that meeting yourself where you are, oh my gosh, that requires so much compassion and grace. And we really struggle with that as humans. And I find that athletes in particular struggle with that. There is this weird thing that, especially in sport culture, that I find for some reason people think that compassion and competitiveness can't coexist. And that drives me insane, because I actually think that compassion is one of the most, maybe with mindfulness, one of the most foundational and transformational skills that athletes can tap into. I think it is what allows us to actually be resilient human beings. We don't have to get off on a tangent around that. But I think meeting yourself where you are, especially as a coach that is trying to really take care of themselves, it requires so much compassion, because half the time we as humans, and it's in our nature, right? It's wired into us to just kind of be a little bit more critical. But, we sit in this place of, wow, I'm not sleeping enough. And man, why can't I just get it together? Why can't I just go to bed a little bit earlier? Why can't I just let myself rest? Why? And there's this connotation of judgment, right? We're judging ourselves. And so a lot of the work that I do is around, and this is mindfulness to a T, right? But like, remove that judgment, right? We have to come to this awareness with compassion and acceptance, so that we can just simply say, I'm not getting enough sleep right now. Okay. That's where I'm at. How can I now, right, move the needle? How
Mm.
can I now start to make small choices, small pieces here? I mean, we don't move a mountain in a day. We move one stone at a time, right? So I really think that that's the next phase, that like really assessing the relationship that you have to meeting yourself where you are. Because a lot of times you're meeting yourself where you are with a lot of judgment, a lot of shaking the finger, right? I should know better, right? All the above. And it's like, put that on the back burner, man. Right. I really, I think that is so, so true for so many of us.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my GPS reference. You don't type in your starting point, and your GPS is like, "What the hell? You're 10 hours away. Come on!"
Right.
They're like, "Okay, no, we're 10 hours away. We'll remind you in about 30 minutes when you have to take a right." Is that
Yeah.
an approach we can take to our own well-being? I mean, I guess I'm just gonna call it the GPS approach, if for
Mm-hmm.
lack of better terms. We can type in our starting point and then hit a mile marker, if you will, and be like, "Okay,
Mm-hmm.
do I keep going straight down this road, or is it time to reroute and take a right?" Is that
Sure.
would you argue an effective approach?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, yeah, does traffic come up? Do I need to take the back roads,
Do
right?
I get
Like,
a
yeah.
flat
I mean,
tire?
it's
What's going on?
and yeah, I mean, I'm kind of laughing here because sometimes my GPS just drives me bonkers because she'll always take the, if you don't actually like sit down and look, right, at like what route she's taking you or he's taking you, like it will take you the like I don't know why the other day, this is a side tangent, but it's kind of a funny one. Like I'm in Baltimore trying to go to Philly and I know how to get to Philly. Right. But what I was looking, I was just making sure that 95 was okay. Right. There was no traffic. And for some reason, the route that she popped me on was like this back ended, like go to Lancaster and then up. And I'm like, what is she doing? So yeah, I like it. I think there's room in there for flexibility and to check in and to kind of, again, yeah, remove that filter because you're exactly right, right? I mean, the GPS doesn't scream at you. It doesn't really care where you are, right? It just picks up where you are and it goes. And so that is really that kind of removing that filter, that judgment that we might place on ourselves. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah, not to overdo the GPS thing, but I turned my voice into an Australian lady. So
Love
maybe
it.
that's like the voice of conscience on yourself to kind of let go of that judgment, right? If you can physically change the GPS voice from what was it, like standard English woman or something it gave
Mm-hmm.
me at first, or standard English man, to pick your voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at yourself where your feet are, you can either be judgmental, which sometimes a little bit of self-awareness in that aspect is good, but not
Sure.
too much to the point where you don't even want to get started.
Mm-hmm.
My next question to you would be, okay, we're here, we're coaches, we're athletes, we're dads, moms, siblings. Like we wear so many hats and we feel like we just don't have time.
Mm.
How do you combat a client or a person who is considered is worried about how much time they have to get this done
Mm-hmm.
when it is a job?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this also, it comes back to our conversation around like, and I am such a, I start a lot of the work that I do, especially with individual athletes around values, around intention, because I think at the end of the day, if your values and your intention are really aligned with X, Y, and Z, I think you do make the time, right? And we also have to really honor and respect that there are so many hours in a day. And so I really love um, and this is then where we get into just being able to kind of break things up so that they are more accessible. So again, using this kind of like meet yourself halfway. So great example, if you would let's go around sleep. So one of the things I'm a huge fan of is sleep hygiene. Say you're a college coach and you get home late and then you've got kids and you got to put kids to bed, and the reality is you would love to do an hour of sleep hygiene, of restorative yoga or nervous system down regulation, right? But you just don't have an hour. Like it's literally just not possible. Meet yourself halfway. 10 minutes is better than nothing. 12 minutes is better than nothing, right? 5 minutes, 1 minute is better than nothing. I mean, for me, I love the principle of like 1 minute counts. We all have a minute. We all have a minute. 1 minute counts. So, and I use this a lot in, when I teach mindfulness and meditation. It's very, and I very rarely start an athlete out on a formal meditation. I would never do that because it's actually quite an advanced practice. And so how can you just in pockets of 1 minute be more mindful? That counts. That's still training your mindfulness muscle. It's not a 10 or 20-minute formal meditation. It's still moving the needle. So I use that concept a lot, and I would really encourage coaches to think about that. And again, this is that adaptability and accessibility piece. How do I craft something given the overarching principles around something like sleep hygiene or self-care and make them work for me, make them work for my life? I think it's also getting creative. Get creative. Um, Include your kids in your sleep hygiene.
Yes.
Put your baby on your belly. Do some belly breathing. Right. I have a friend, my childhood best friend, who I've known for 25 years. Just had her first child about a year ago, and she will literally put her legs up with baby in tow. Baby's crawling, right? But get creative. Right. There is no, I teach a lot of like what I consider overarching principles within mindfulness and mental health and self-care and resiliency. And then I say, make it work for you. Here's the overarching principle. I am not telling you that this is exactly how it has to be done because I say so. Absolutely not. Make it work for you. So I'm a huge fan of that kind of creativity piece.
Yes, I really appreciate that, and you actually sparked a lot of, um, I guess, insights that I was thinking about when you said this that I didn't even know I had. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about get creative, and here's the overarching theme: as coaches and as athletes, as leaders, we have an innate ability to lead, right? We take on the task ourselves for the people underneath us. If you're a captain, even if you're the player with the least amount of minutes on the team, you still have to be a leader in your own right, because you're the only one in your position. You at least have to lead yourself. When you said baby on belly, it's kind of, when I mean, it sounds funny to say out loud, right? But if you strip it down into like theory a little bit here, I guess unofficial theory, because I don't have the qualifications for that. But if you strip it down to, we'll just call them Caleb qualifications here. I like to make things more relatable for people who might not have the letters next to their name, if that makes sense. Um, and I'm not saying you don't or anyone doesn't, but like this is just how my crazy brain works, and it seems to work like that for a lot of people. So, baby on belly, back to task here, Caleb. When you said that, it makes me think of, one, you're helping yourself, right? As in your sleep hygiene of doing that breath work, but two, the baby might fall asleep as well, and you don't have to sit and rock them for hours, right? As a coach, we do that already with our players, whether you think you do or not. We want them to get fitness, but we don't want them to complain about fitness. What do we do in soccer? We put a ball at their feet and put a goal on either end and just make them do an intense 5-minute drill instead of 20 seconds. They don't complain anymore, and we're tricking them into fitness, right? Like, we tell kids to, yeah, we air quotes here, we trick kids into eating broccoli, right? Like, you almost have to trick yourself into starting the task. I think you don't have to do some sort of like 180 life turn in order to accomplish what you want, right? If you're a coach or someone who is a leader, even an athlete, we know our strengths as much as we don't think we do. And if you don't, start there. What are my strengths? How can I help myself get better? But as a coach, I'd argue you already have that part figured down for the most part. So, do I want to lead by example? Number one, as a coach, if I do, let me start practicing this. Okay, how can I start practicing this? Well, I'm good at incorporating multiple things with an overarching theme for my team, right? Like, we're preparing for the game. I'm working with what I have, my team. I'm not just going to pick up a random transfer in a day. What do I have to work with? Okay, let's work with it, break it down, like a practice plan for your life, if you will. How can we start building a practice plan from our life right now in the middle of this episode with you? What is the first step you would take after awareness to get that practice plan started?
Hmm. Well, actually, I might back up, right? So I might actually back up before awareness. Although, I more so think about awareness as just like an underlying underlying principle of, how we should come to assessing and reflecting our overall well-being, right? I mean, awareness is going to help with all of the above. So sure, awareness, I guess, could be the starting place. But I mean, I really think that so much of this starts with reflecting, taking an inventory of, yeah, your values, your intention. What are you already doing? What's already working? I'm a huge strengths based person. I think we tend to, especially in sport, really focus on the what's not happening, right? Where do we need improvement? And what if we actually started with people's strengths? What if we actually started with what's going well? What do you already do that you can freaking be proud of? Because that is a great starting place, in my opinion, right? I am always a fan of like, do more of the good, right? Is there more of the good that you can be doing? So I would say actually starting there, right? That kind of like that values, that reflection, that taking inventory, the strengths piece. And then we move into kind of the awareness and the assessment of like, okay, yeah, where am I right now? And that kind of helps frame where you are right now and creating that awareness around where am I right now? What are my needs? Where do I need support? Where do I need to be making some change, right? So that we can then start moving the needle. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge, there are so many, if you go, I'm not always a huge fan of like self-assessments, but I don't necessarily think that values, like doing a values sort is an assessment. I love values sorts. So for people listening, ACT, acceptance commitment therapy is it's a theory, it's an intervention, or I guess it's a modality, right? And ACT it's very values driven, but if you just type into Google, like ACT values sort, there will be a ton that come up that you could just do. And that at least, because I think a lot of times people are like, well, values, like, what are my values? We get values from a lot of places. We get values from our lived experience, from our family, from culture, but really starting there. And then starting with that intention piece of like, okay, so what is my intention for taking a look at this? What is my intention for self-care? What is my intention for taking care of myself and resiliency and being that role model, right? Because I think that role model piece is, I am such a fan of like coaches, and I am someone that tries to always live by this. Like I refuse to put out or ask something of my athlete that I am not willing to do myself. No
Mm.
chance. It's never going to happen. I will live and die by that. And I think sport coaches should be doing the same thing. Maybe not in terms of like, getting on the field and getting in that, 5v5 running thing, right? But I think in terms of this stuff, right? Particularly the mental health, the self-care stuff, absolutely. And so, yeah, where does that come from? What's the intention behind that? Why? What's your why? I'm a huge, huge fan of that, really diving into that. I really think that that's the starting place. It's a great starting place.
Yeah, I love that. And everyone finds their why at a different point in time, and your
Mm-hmm.
why could change at any
Totally.
given point in time.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest ones, even though I'm not a, I haven't had that epiphany yet, or that experience rather, is when you become a parent. I've been told that changes your why almost daily, but the consistent is there of why you get up in the morning and why you do the things you do. There's the word why within finding our why. But as a as a coach, does that mean, okay, we want to lead by example? Myself, panic attacks. That doesn't mean I have to have a panic attack in front of the team by any means. That also doesn't mean I have to hide it if it happens, right? It's one of those things where authentically, if it comes about your struggle, you could use it as a learning point. You could decide to hide it. That's totally a personal choice. Say someone doesn't decide to hide their whatever struggle they have, their anxiety, their sadness, whatever. They show up to work to coach and they're just down in the dumps and their team takes notice. One, what does that do for the growth and the psyche of the individual? And two, how can we show our athletes that, like, yeah, I may seem like I have it all figured out, but I don't. And that's okay. But I mean, still trusted me, even though I don't have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's a tricky line to balance too. We want to portray as coaches that we know everything, we have all the answers. We want our athletes to trust us, but that's just not
Mm.
realistic.
Yeah. I think I think so. What we're kind of talking to, and I'm going to use the term self-disclosure, which is in therapy world, right? We for a really long time we came from this model of like a therapist in a clinical setting cannot share anything about their lives. It's not okay. It's totally off limits. And we're slowly shifting away from that. And I love it. I think that movement is really helpful because self disclosure that is appropriate and that has the intention to create connection is really important. So here's what I'm going to say about that, right? Do I think we are moving in a time where people feel like they need to just share everything? Yes. Do I think that's appropriate? No. I think that self disclosure needs to be done with intention. And if a coach's intention is to create connection and send the message that you're not alone with discernment, right? And I think there is, because coaches also have to remember that they are in a position of power. So, and that is really, really important. I don't think enough coaches are really understanding that. And so, especially around this conversation around mental health, they just need to be aware of that. And so, what is the intention of sharing? I think is super, super important. And the other thing that I will mention that I don't think we're having enough conversations about is that sharing is really tricky. I think there's a lot out there right now that's like share, 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 share so that you know we're not alone. And the reality is that we all come to sharing and talking about our lived experience and our mental health from different places. There are many, many people in the world that they have had lived experience where sharing was completely unsafe. Sharing was the opposite of connection and feeling like they're not alone. And so we need to honor and respect that. And we should not be forcing people to share, 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 share. There's something in me that just like feels really strongly about that because I have so many athletes and coaches, quite frankly, that have had real, genuine lived experience, or they grew up in family dynamics, or they grew up in a culture where it was literally not safe to share. And so, therefore, then when you get in a group dynamic or when there's sharing going on and we're either forcing people to share or they are in a group where there's a lot of sharing going on, that may feel extremely triggering and very unsafe. And we need to really understand that. And so sharing for me is like it is all about really understanding what self-disclosure is, why are we sharing, what is the intention, and then just really being mindful of the details and the language that we're using to share. We can share and make a tremendous impact without going into the weeds. And I do this quite frequently. I mean, I talk about my story, but I do not share the very gritty ins and outs and details because I don't need to. That doesn't actually give the impact that I want. Right. So I think this piece around sharing, and I am all for, and I think coaches, much like kind of the therapy world, where for a really long time it was like, don't share anything, don't self-disclose. I think coaches have kind of lived in that world as well, right? To kind of be the, stone cold, don't show any expression, don't talk about anything, don't establish relationships with their players. I don't agree with that either, right? I think there's a middle ground, and so much of this, and this is something that like I really advocate for having dialogue and conversation about. How do we do this? How do we equip our coaches to feel like they know how to share if they want to share, right? Or also disclose that they're not going to share this piece, and that's okay too, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't open to conversations about mental health, but they're just not willing to cross that boundary, and I think that's perfectly okay. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for sharing that. For sharing that, because
Sure.
I think that is something that does not get talked about enough amidst all the sharing that goes on, and that's something I've been sitting with lately. Is like, okay, we have a platform where people can share if they choose, and I'm not the end all be all of okay, this gets to go out, this doesn't get to go out, right? But you have to almost at some points go, okay, I'm not saying this will never be shared or this will never be told, but right now is not the time. And it doesn't mean you're any less valued, doesn't mean you're any more valued, anything. It's just with the listener base that we have on our platform and the needs that they're asking for, you have to almost kind of do that use your best discretion. I think that's something you can apply to any aspect of your life with any story you want, right? You're not going to go to a kindergartner and describe a panic attack the same way you would describe to a college athlete, just as you're not going to talk to them like that. You're just not. And I think in an environment, especially with athletics, where everything is under a microscope, you're either in front of a camera, you're in front of a crowd, you have a microphone in your face. Sometimes you're told exactly what to say when you go up there, so you don't put your foot in your mouth. Like, they strip your personality, whatever. I mean, all the things you've heard, you have to almost say, okay, what part of me am I going to share? What part of me am I not going to share? So I appreciate that response, and it's okay. Like, no one, if you want to share, come on, let's talk about it. I'm here for it. If you don't want to share, just you don't have to get in front of the microphone. It's not for you. What do you think? What do you think? How should? I guess that's a. I'll rephrase that. As a coach myself, there are moments where I wish certain players would share certain things, and I wish other players wouldn't share certain things. How do we navigate that aspect really quick before we kind of wrap up this episode? Because I would sit here and talk with you for hours if it weren't for time
Yeah,
limits.
no, great.
How do we navigate the space of letting our athletes be individuals, but also building a team atmosphere so that we can be the most successful? I guess that's a better way to put it.
Great question. So the one thing I will say, and this is relevant to what we're talking about, right, is this. I think this really starts with more awareness around the impact of sharing. And here's what I mean by that is helping people understand that sharing has the potential to impact people in profound ways, in really good ways and in really harmful ways. So this gets into a conversation around what we might consider, and I do a lot in kind of the, I mean, I'm a trauma therapist, right? So I'm in like group spaces. Something I am really passionate about is like what we consider trauma-informed spaces. So this gets into a conversation of safety and harm. And the reality is that when we share details about our lived experience that could be difficult. So I'll throw out an example, right, around having a panic attack or an eating disorder or suicidal ideation, right? We don't know how our words, how what we are sharing is going to land on someone else. So even when our intention is really good, so even, if we're coming to this like with having a lot of awareness and having a really good intention, we can still cause harm. We can still say something, share something that lands with someone else in very profound ways. And I think if we help both coaches and athletes understand that, the better. And then it's really about, facilitating, right? More so group spaces in ways that are somewhat structured, right? And really have some boundaries and some containment around what is appropriate to share here in this setting and what is not, right? Knowing that we can't control everyone, right? But really, for an athlete to sit there and open up and tell every single detail of their mental health journey is actually really not appropriate this time, right? So if we start off that way and we get more proactive with that as opposed to reactive, that can take care of a lot of things, right? And I think it's just, this is part of also, we're having this conversation, or we're needing to have this conversation more and more because the mental health movement has exploded, right? And it's kind of exploded, honestly, like so quick and so fast, right? That we're almost like, oh crap, yeah, like what's happening here, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And what I will say about this piece in terms of, I can't tell you how many times as a college coach or just a youth coach, right, where you're really kind of looking at the group dynamic and you're wanting that one person, right, to share, and that they're just a little hesitant, but that they probably have something to share, right? So what I will say is, how do you as a coach just continue to be this presence and this advocate and really lay it out there that you are there to listen and to be someone that they can share with, again, without forcing it. They don't have to share, right? But that you are there when they are ready to share, right? Especially in a more one-on-one setting, right? Or in the group setting. But also really, I mean, so much of this is just about like how you actually facilitate that group environment, right? And I'm such a fan of like, there should be boundaries and there should be containment and there should be conversations around this safety versus harm thing. And I think that takes care of it a lot of the times.
Yeah, Again, I appreciate so much of what you've said in this episode, and that last statement. Again, we appreciate that. I want to go back really quick before we actually jump into the final question here that I'm very interested to hear your answer in. You do have to realize, like you mentioned, as a coach or a leader or a captain, you do hold a little bit of power, and your words do have a significant amount of weight. Again, anyone on the team's words have a significant amount of weight. That was the point of this conversation. But specifically, if you're given a title, right? If you're granted that title by the coach, or if you're hired by the institution, someone above you thought you deserved that role. Admit when you don't know things. It's okay. That's something that I've started to practice myself. I used to think that I had to be the perfect this, the perfect that, the perfect this, the I have the answer. Turns out I didn't know shit. Sorry for my language, but I didn't. I thought I did, and I faked my way through it, and I probably don't give myself enough credit for that. But actually, I do know shit. I'm not going to sit there and do that to myself. But I I didn't have the answer to everything when I wanted to, from my teammates, from myself, for my coach. That's a lot of stuff that I've worked through in therapy. If you're a coach and a player comes to you with something you don't know about, or you have no idea, like specifically me as a male coach for a female identifying sports team, it's like some of the things that they come to me with, I'm like, hey, I'm here to listen, and I'm not going to pretend like I know, but here is someone who might be able to help you. Here's a resource that might be able to help you. Do the homework if you really want to be there for your student athletes. Do the homework on the things you don't know, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to learn them and know them, but have enough respect for your players to send them to someone who might. And I think that's something that also gets overlooked as
Yeah.
coaches, because we do want to be there and we genuinely care. And a lot of times we do have the answer that when we don't want it to be that crushing moment for that athlete.
Yeah, I'll say one last thing, and this comes from my mentor, or one of my mentors, and she said it to me around being a therapist, but I think it's so applicable for coaches, and I keep using it. Coaching, sport coaching in particular, is not about having all the answers. Do you have the right questions? Right? Do you actually, it is not about having all the answers, right? But can you really sit with someone, right? And then ask good questions so that you can listen a little bit more, right? And just keep being curious, because I think that's so much of, and particularly around this, the mental health conversation, like that's what it's about. It is not about having answers. They're not supposed to have answers. Sport coaches are not trained mental health professionals. They don't need to be, right? There's a reason they're a sport coach, right? So I would really encourage my coaches and coaches out there to think about that. It is not about having answers. It's about having questions and asking the questions.
Yes, yes, that makes me so excited to finally hear someone say that, because I've been thinking it up here, but I haven't been able to put it to words like you just did. So, again, thank you very much for that last little tidbit and all that you've shared on this platform. Before I jump into the final question, can you tell our listeners where they can find you, and then how they can get a hold of some of your resources if what you have said today really spoke to them?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm pretty much on every social media channel, Instagram, Emily Perrin, LMSW. I have a website, perrinwellnessperformance.com. I think it is. There you can also find a bunch of free resources. I have a ton of ebooks. I actually have a new ebook coming out on Sunday evening, which I'm super excited about. I have a YouTube channel. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty active. I mean, you can find my email, you can shoot me a DM. I'm pretty accessible. So any of those, you can find me.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we can tell your passion. I hate doing this over the phone, but or over Zoom, but you can almost see your passion come right
Oh,
through the screen. So we
thank you.
really appreciate that. And you do have, I mean, I was looking at your website. It is what you said, by the way, so you don't have to
Okay,
worry
good.
there.
I always forget if there's an and in there or not, but there's not.
Well, we've all been there. We've all been there. Sometimes the domain name is the last thing to get changed when you do a lot of change within your company. But
Totally.
um, the final question, are you ready for it, Emily?
Sure.
All right. So, if there is one person who has made it this far in the episode that you know needs a hug, who would you give your hug to, and why?
Mm. Gosh. Okay. It would probably be two people, because it would probably either be my best friend, who I mentioned earlier, because she listens to almost everything I do, or my sister maybe, and both of them are, yeah, just going through some life things right now, and I think they could both use a hug, and they're far away, so or relatively far away. And those are two people that I would say my inner circle is very small. They're definitely in the inner circle, and I would give them a hug. But the other thing that I would say that, these are people that I don't know, is like the coach or the athlete that's listening to this and sitting there and just resonating with things I'm saying, or maybe a piece of my journey that feels really lost and feels really hopeless, because I know that that lost, hopeless feeling is like such. I mean, if I could, I would be rich if I had a dollar for every time that I hit that over the last 5 years. And so, like, I would give you a hug and I would just tell you to keep going, because it does work out. It does work out. It's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible place to be, but like, keep going. That's who I would give a hug to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. I'm sure there was not only your best friend and your sister are going to feel that hug, but the athlete that you just spoke to, or the human that you just spoke to, because a lot of us have ended our athletic identity and our athletic journey. But I agree. Keep going. You're worth it. And at the very least, you have a resource in Make Mental, and I'm sure, and Emily, if you really needed to reach out, we can point you in the right direction. So we take that role seriously. So
Salt City Vintage, where nostalgia meets style. Salt City Vintage is a treasure trove of unique and timeless pieces that will elevate your wardrobe. Salt City Vintage believes in the power of fashion to evoke emotions and memories. They don't just sell clothes, they provide a sense of nostalgia and comfort to their customers. Whether you're looking for that perfect vintage band tee or a statement jacket, come visit Salt City Vintage on Instagram or at any of their pop-up locations to experience the magic of retro fashion.
one last time, thank you so much for delivering some warm final hugs and for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience, and just your true energy for mental health, and not how to only raise awareness about it, but as you mentioned, really start to take action, um, to coaches. I think we focused mainly on in this episode, but I think a lot of that can be applied outside of the coaching role, right? You
Sure.
can, again, you can see the overall picture and then
Mhm.
focus down on the coaches. We can see the overall picture and focus in on ourselves. So
Mhm.
thank you very much for
Absolutely.
sharing your expertise in this field, and
My
we are
pleasure.
so excited to hear this book. I'm going to have to jump on it now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.